In basic rhythmic training number 48, we're going to be tackling eighth notes for the first time. Before we actually get into the nuts and bolts of number 48, I want to go over a few things to prepare us for performing eighth notes. The first thing that we want to do is to make sure that we're really confident in dividing a beat into two equal parts, or what we call subdividing the beat into two. Because that's really what we're doing when we're performing an eighth note. We're dividing a beat into two equal parts. So before you start practicing number 48, get with your metronome and do two things. Start performing on the beat. Give yourself a ta on every beat, like this. Ta, 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 ta. And then try dividing the beat into two and giving two tas in every beat. Ta, 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 like that. Once you feel comfortable doing one and the other, see if you can switch back and forth. Give yourself 2 beats of quarter notes and 2 beats of eighth notes, something like this. Ta, 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 ta. I'm sorry, I meant 4 beats of quarter notes and 4 beats of eighth notes, but going in between, really fluently going in between the quarter note and the eighth note will be a very important thing. The second thing that we want to talk about is the way that we count musical examples that have eighth notes. When we count a beat, count a measure, say, in 2/4, we usually count with 2 beats. 1, 2, 1, 2. So if I were counting a measure of 2/4, I'd count 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. But we want to account for the eighth notes, and not just the beats, not just the 1, 2, 1, 2, but the eighth notes that are happening in between. So what we do is we add a little count for the eighth note as well, and we usually say "and" after the number, and we usually put a little plus sign to indicate that. So we say 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and. So now, if I subdivide my beat into eighth notes, I'll be saying not just 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, but 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and. And in any musical example that has eighth notes, we always want to be feeling that underlying pulse of the eighth note. 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and. Even if we don't have eighth notes in that particular measure. So for instance, if I look at this first measure here, I have my beat 1 right here on the first quarter note, and my beat 2 right here on my first eighth note. But I want to feel those eighth notes as well. So I would say 1 and 2 and. What would I actually speak? Well, here's what I would do. I would say ta on beat 1. I would hold that ta for the second half of the beat, for the and. Then I'm going to say ta on beat 2 and ta on the second half of beat 2, or what we call the and of beat 2. Notice the second measure is an exact duplication of the first, so it's going to be the same thing. 1 and 2 and. I'm going to say ta on 1 and hold that ta for the and of the beat. Then ta on 2 and ta on the second half of 2 on the and of 2. Then, in measure 3, we just have quarter notes, but I still want to have that underlying feeling of the eighth note. So I'm still going to be counting 1 and 2 and, even though I don't really need the and of this beat. So I'm going to say ta on beat 1 and hold that ta out. I'm going to say ta on beat 2 and hold that ta out. And then on the last measure, we have a half note. But I still, even though I don't need the eighth notes, I still want to feel and I still want to count those underlying eighth notes as I'm performing this half note. So I'm just going to say ta, and I'm going to hold out that ta for 1 and 2 and. So if I were to perform this entire first line, here's what I would do. And I'm going to count off 2 measures before I start performing of 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and, just to set that up for myself, just so I remember where that eighth note pulse is. 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and ta 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 ta. Now if I go to the second line, I have a few different patterns that I'm going to be dealing with. And let's again break this down with the 1 and 2 and. In measure 5, the first measure of the second line, I have an eighth note on 1, an eighth note on the and of 1, and then I have a quarter note on 2 and. So I'm going to say ta, ta, and then I'm going to say ta on this quarter note and hold it for the and. And then the second measure is an exact duplicate of that. 1 and 2 and. So ta, ta on the and of 1, and then I'm going to hold the ta for 2 and on the quarter note. The third measure of the second line has 4 eighth notes in a row. 1 and 2 and. So I'm going to say ta, 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 ta. And then in the final measure, I have a half note. So I'm going to hold ta for the entire 2 beats. But again, I'm going to be counting in my head. I'm going to be counting this 1 and 2 and underneath, just so I make sure that I'm feeling that underlying eighth note pulse. So let me now perform the second line of number 48. Ta 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 ta. So now I'm going to go back and perform this whole thing. And as you're just getting going, don't be afraid to perform this along with me. If you're new to eighth notes, this can sometimes take some getting used to. So don't be afraid for this first example to perform along with me. So I'm going to perform all of number 48. I'm going to give myself 2 measures of setup, 2 measures of just counting 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and. Here we go. At quarter note equals 70. 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and ta 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 ta. And that is our first example with eighth notes.